Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Olivier Malafronte has joined me in the studio today. Welcome, Olivier.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing your story today. We have known each other for a long time, but the short story you're going to share today and what's been happening to you during your life and career is very fresh and new to me as well. So I'm really looking forward to hearing that. Before we start, our audience always likes to know a little about who they're listening to and watching today. So Olivier, just tell us a little bit about yourself and where your current focus is.
Yeah, so I'm a French entrepreneur. I've been a pioneer in AI coaching since 2015, 2016. I'm a repeat entrepreneur, and then I recently terminated a PhD on AI coaching and in leadership development. So right now, my focus is AI coaching. So I work with coaches and experts, and I'm also a research associate with the French University. So I do research and I do a lot of innovation in that space.
Super. And when you're not doing all of that, because I know you're very busy, but what is it you do to have a personal life that balances things out?
So when I'm not doing that, I do a lot of treks. I love mountains. Anytime I can, I go up in the mountains for trekking. I bring my son, so I became a dad about a year and a half ago. So that's also one of the life's joy. So I educate my kid on the mountain, and so I do a bit of sea swimming as well. I like to swim all year long and get in the cold water. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I try to spend time in nature and in mountains. That's resourceful.
Super. Thank you for that. We'll find out more about you later on. Let's go back to what shaped you. So our childhoods shape us. You and I both know the self-coaching space very well, and that willingness to explore and become aware of who we are. And obviously that's where it all originates. We still don't know, do we, about how much is nurture and how much is nature. But take us back to your childhood. What was it like for you growing up, and how did that shape that early sense of leadership for you?
Yeah, so I grew up only child, so that's one big thing because I've always had to seek people's attention, make friends. So basically, the little story is just pretty fun out of any business thing, but anyway, I learned when I was adult that my mother was pregnant like right away after when I was born, but they didn't keep the kid, and so it's quite an interesting story. But when I was kid, I was making dreams. I really needed it. I wanted to have a sister or brother. I learned when I was adult with an education kind of therapist, someone gifted with feelings, let's say. She asked me whether my mom had abortion or something like that, and I said no because I didn't know anything. Years after, I shared that with my parents, and yes, in the end, they told me that they didn't keep one of the kids. So that's something quite interesting because I've always felt within myself that I was about to have, or that I had a sister or brother. And so in the way I grew up as an only child, I was always kind of seeking to build kind of brotherhood with people. And so I have a few very good close friends, and they're like my brothers, right? Even when I work, for instance, if I create a company, if I run a business, if I collaborate with people, I'm always seeking an authentic and very close, almost friendly relationship. And so I think that's a little bit of part of myself, this kind of a strong and close relationship. This is very important. I don't like to work with people. I don't like to interact, or I don't like to hang out with people if I don't have this sense of friendship, brotherhood, vulnerability, being able to be together, right? So that's something very big. And so it's quite interesting because this has been shaping all my life philosophy, values, and beliefs. I was actually, chatting with a coach very recently, and we were actually coming back on these things. And so I've always, as values and beliefs, I've always had at the center being together, helping each other, bringing peace in between people. And so if I make the link, for instance, to the way I work or to, to the leadership things, right? It has a lot to see with being vulnerable. I'm an open book. It gets you very little time to get to know me. I don't think, many people would say, oh, it's a bad thing. It's good to keep some mystery and people get to know you through time and blah, blah, blah. But actually it's not, I'm taking the opposite way. I don't like to keep things hidden. Like I like to share who I am with people right away. It's kind of for me a way to build trust and relation. It's kind of for me a way to get to know people or to know myself in the interaction with people. And basically decide whether I open the door or not, right? So that's a big part of myself. So when I was kid, when I was at I think elementary school, something like that, before high school, I was really having a lot of fun. I was a kind of kid, following in the classroom, so kind of getting the average and being able to, follow the steps. But I was spending most of my time actually looking for attention and trying to be in the relation with friends. That was really at the center of my attention. And so sometimes it was like, I was getting some critiques, it's like, from young kids, like, oh, Olivier is always kind of, he's lacking attention, or he's responding to the teachers, or he's looking at us, or he's not doing what we should do, right? That was kind of, what I was getting, most of the time. But I was having a lot of fun. Everything changed, high school, just before getting in university, because the high school I was doing was kind of, technical studies. And I was like 17, 16, 17, 18 years old. My first love, like girlfriend, was living, in another country, like more than 5 hours train. She was much older. And so I wasn't in the right position with high school. My mentality, my mental models, my life philosophy was much, older at that time. And so I was like, whoa, I was getting afraid of, when I was looking around me at these, young guys that were just, doing the wrong jokes, and I wasn't really, at the right place. And that was tough. And at that moment, there's something that shifted within myself. I became suddenly much more serious, right? I had some sort of ambition. I wanted to get out of that and not fail, right? I do remember that kind of, it's something that, something happened with myself, something hard, something, fell down, was like, oh, if you don't pay attention, you're going to fail. You're going to look like these guys around you, right? That was big. I was falling sick like 2-3 times a year during that time, right? So it was big. It wasn't kind of a depression, but I had sport competitions, I had travels to see the girlfriend. So I was attached. I had some pillars and a good family, so that's fine. But it was a tough period. So yeah, I had a first shift there. So going back to these values and beliefs, that, I think the most important in life is that, we're all equal. I've been traveling a lot since I was a kid with my parents. And so I think that I've been used, even if I'm an only child, I've been used to very, 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 very early to go with the difference, to go with diversity, because I was traveling. And so I had to make friends with people abroad. I didn't know how to speak the language. So I was speaking with hands. I was speaking with the smiles. I was just being with the intention, right? And I do have some souvenirs that are very good, actually, connecting with people, kids. So I built, this kind of, but basically going back to these values and beliefs, then it got me, apart from, my dad and my uncle were consultants, psychotherapists, and coaches, and they were already working together in organizations to develop competencies. I kind of fell down when I was a kid. So I remember myself, I was 5 years old, and I was playing with technologies. I wanted to build technology, like architect technology. That's something I had in mind already very young. But with this kind of, backgrounds that I just told you about, and my family background, my dad and uncle, that kind of inspired that, psychology thing. Psychology always had, even without reading psychology when I was younger, it always, was always at the center. I was always trying to kind of, find ways to be friends with everyone, kind of solve conflicts. And so naturally I was kind of developing these kind of skills, right? And, I'm a coach today, anyways, there's no doubt on that. So that's part of me, the understanding human beings, understanding who am I. I've always kind of, been thinking, questioning myself. that's something, that just came naturally. So yeah, I've always been kind of inspired. And I knew when I was a student in business administration, I was already thinking about complementing my studies with a psychology degree. So I didn't because I fell down in coaching. But that was something that was already kind of, that was there, in my intentions. So yeah, that's, do I answer your questions? That's a part of myself.
Yeah, we have that in common as well. I've never really studied psychology, but it's always been there for me and had a keen interest in it in terms of how humans interrelate. And it's becoming even more important now, isn't it? So I've forgotten we've got that in common. Just before we move on from the childhood, we've talked briefly about your father and uncle, inspiring you. But as you were growing up before that point where you became more serious and focused in a way, which is that, that moment, what was it about your parents in terms of how they wanted you to grow up? And was that something that you conformed to? What kind of values did they instill rather than you having this, a core natural value set that you were bringing?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, a lot of, openness and, freedom. So I don't remember having parents, telling me what to do. And actually that's quite fun because, growing up, actually, if I was going back, I wished my dad was actually kind of, leading me a little bit more into his business, because I think that would have accelerated, my success, because he was already running a business, had, clients, good, kind of good expertise into training, into HR, all these things, a company, right? Actually, his company then, funded a part of my coaching training later on because I was working with his company. We were, even though we loved each other, much, we had a lot of, frictions and tensions. So this prevented, I had this kind of, a bit of a rebellion, with my dad. And so even though we have, a lot of love, we were never able to kind of carry out, or carry on, a project or work together, right? Too much of a difference here, something that I was kind of, rejecting. So that being said, it's quite, weird and interesting because I've always had, a lot of love, a lot of freedom. And my parents were really here. They've been supporting in all decisions and all experiments that I wanted to do, just, giving me complete opening and freedom and support to choose my path. So in a way, I mean, it's great. I think, we could wish that for everyone. But looking at this now as an adult, innovation leader, and coach, there's a part of myself today that was like, oh, maybe I would do different, with my kid, because if I have an expertise, if I have a background, if I have something that I can offer, maybe I would try to invite and guide my son for more discovery, or maybe try to understand him a little bit more and see that potentially getting him to work with me earlier on would actually potentially just facilitate his path. That's a reflection that I have today as an adult and a dad. So in a way, yeah, that was great. I grew up with a lot of freedom. I'm just thankful, but I see both sides of that.
Absolutely. And everyone's journey is unique in that sense. Talk us through then in terms of the university days and then just beyond that in terms of particularly around, I'm really curious, Olivier, now you've shared what you've shared. Obviously in business, you've been at the forefront of AI for, a number of years, which obviously, followed university as well. And this sense that you need to feel close to the people that you are invested in that sense. And yet you had to go and seek investment from people that were going to invest in your ideas and your business. And sometimes those kinds of people are not the kind of people that we necessarily feel comfortable around. So bear that in mind as a theme about how that's helped you and how that's maybe got in the way a bit as you've developed. But just talk us through those first few years.
Well, it was serendipitous. So I knew I was going to be entrepreneur always. I mean, I went and I did a master's degree, but just because, I'm the first of the family that, goes, the farthest in terms of studies, like master's and then PhD recently. But anyway, that's, that's not a big thing that I pay much attention to. But, I just did master's because, yeah, in France, we have great opportunities, and French diplomas, they're well received internationally, etc. So that was more of a strategy. But if I have to redo things, I would have quit school earlier on, or I would have, started my businesses much earlier. I think I've lost, 5 or 10 years, and I could have started, with my way of doing things. I would have gained time and knowledge. But anyway, the first few years I went through, I think that goes back to one of your first questions as well, because when I was a student, I went through my first two loss of confidence and big challenges, both professionally and personally, because during my studies, I had the chance to do a lot of international internship, working with a big, like 500 company. Worked with the EMEA HQ in Amsterdam, and then I went to the US in Sunnyvale, Silicon Valley, and then went back to the Paris HQ in France. It was kind of special. I landed there. People with 10 years or 20 years of experience in the company were looking at me like, who is this guy? And so, it was starting well. But then when I was, finishing my master's, I was doing a kind of an apprenticeship program. So I was working in the company almost every day. And I experienced for the first time that kind of, bad leadership. I was working with a marketing director, a woman. I had great, women examples. All my bosses almost, but one, all my directors, all my bosses have always been women. Very good, very good examples. But one actually was not the right one. She was kind of the power seeking and authoritative and not a good leadership, not, the opposite of empowering leadership. And I remember one day in a meeting, she has cut everything in me. She was telling me in the meeting, you have an issue in your head. You don't think right. And so and she was a leader of a big department, and she had sold something very different to me when she hired me. You're going to help us, with the sales teams, and, we're going to use you this way. And then it was very different. Instead of just, kind of empowering me and getting the best out of me, she was I don't know, she was just kind of diminishing me. And one day in that meeting, I couldn't speak. If I was to speak in that meeting, I was going to cry, right? That was the first time. So I was like, whoa, that was half of the internship, apprenticeship program. And so the other half, 6 months, I stayed there, determined to finish, because there was the last year from master's. I didn't want to quit. So I had some form of resilience, but I was going to work every day with stomach ache. So I didn't quit. That's great. And I got it. But that was very painful. And then maybe a year later, I experienced something very similar, but my girlfriend, where, she was a kind of a big, kind of passion and love story, very painful. I wanted to save her. She had, issues, kind of, younger trauma, things like that with men. And of course, I was a young lover, and I didn't know about, human expectations, the saver kind of, dilemma. And I didn't know about all that. And so I did some mistakes, and I lost myself. And so we went into a big crisis. So at that point, for the first, I was like, oh, and I was early in my career, just had, finished. I was living abroad, was working with a startup. So the pay was wasn't that big. So I was like, oh, I wish I had met a therapist or a coach at that time. But I was, well, I don't have the funds, right, to fund the coach. And that was the first time. So I was 23, 22 years old, kind of. So I went to friends, a lot of conversations, reflections. Time helped. Traveling. I changed country. I went to live in the house of my first technical co-founder in the Philippines. So traveling, meeting other people, then, with good resilience and some good confidence, came back. So I went through that. When I went through that, then basically, serendipity came because I went into coaching. My dad said, oh, look, you've been working with the company a couple of years. We have credits. We can, fund you a coaching training. And then I discovered coaching after all these challenges. And I was, a young tech entrepreneur. So I was following the tech and AI topics. And right away, when I got into coaching, it was visceral call. It was like evidence that the way AI works was actually to give the opportunity to democratize coaching tools and coaching techniques so that, people like me or many other people could benefit from it. And so having all the experience and these values and beliefs that I told you about, I engaged into this first AI coaching startup. That was my call. And so 10 years after, I'm still there, right, doing that.
Yeah.
With big passion, with big power, even though entrepreneurs go ups and downs all the time. I'm still there, right? 3 companies, a PhD, and, I'm still there. And so these early days, then, because I was then connecting back to myself, and there was big self-connection and self-love, I have goosebumps now just seeing that. Everything was serendipity. Meeting my CTO and the right person, meeting the team, hiring people, finding the first investors. Nobody. I had to explain what was coaching to customers. I had to explain what was coaching to investors. I had to explain what was AI. That was like 2015, 2016, right? Mm-hmm. People were not really speaking about AI. Technical AI has been there for the 60s or 50s, but It wasn't like a mainstream, kind of thing. People didn't understand that, especially with coaching. It's traveling in the US, I found like, first American VC for an early stage French company. That was also like something, people were not used to see. It was kind of easy. I mean, the start was kind of easy. It was like, finding the team, finding the first customers, finding investors, raising funds. That was easy the first times. And then of course, some challenges came, but off to a very good start. Team grew up to 9, 10 people, good investors, a lot of friendship, benevolence, business angel, even with that US VC. They gave me, VCs are not often the best friends, but that VC was an early stage VC and they were really good. Actually, I came back in touch with them, very recently, and very good people. So they gave me a good experience of what is a VC actually, which is great. So that kind of friendship comes back, right? In the way I breathe and I do things. It's always there. Yeah. Then COVID came. That was bad. We were about to raise, we lost a major customer. There was a potential distributor. It lasted for a while. So we had to make some hard decisions, cutting the products. And also, so that was the first major kind of, difficulty. Resilience, bounce back, found new investors, new partners. Like just after COVID, they came in, they were in the same industry. They were supposed to kind of, open the market. They had customers, they had things. And then, it was all good on papers when we signed and, they gave us, money. And then suddenly they were just more absorbed by their own business. And so they were not giving the attention and the energy and the resources that, I was expecting from them to receive. So we've basically shut down the first project. And that was like just during COVID and following COVID. And at that time, basically, instead of just going into work somewhere else to find like, a job that could pay my bills, I got like the French government to fund my comeback in university, a master's in research. And I got accepted for a PhD, like a fully funded PhD. So for me, that was a strategy to stay connected to my fields and to kind of, keep digging and grow my skills right. And to get some sort of, scientific hat. And out of that, then, went back in the US, raised $1 million, 2 years after, launched a new company. And then became a dad, etc. So the first year, it's, that was quite easy because I had this self-connection, very strong, sense of purpose. That was, I think, transcendent, very inspirational. I remember like, even today, right? So, sometimes people come back to me and say, when we listen to you, it's like, well, we do see things in a different way, let me pause here and see what question.
Yeah, no, I love it. And what I've got here now, and it's great because I think it's going to take us into a really interesting space, is what you're talking about there is when things are meant to happen, you're in flow, a lot of presence, serendipity, things happen at the right moment. And therefore, things are just being in that sense. And then some stuff comes along where it knocks us off or there's a bump in the road. And that's where we need to maybe think slightly differently. And there's an author called Andrew Bryant, who I know we're both aware of, initially introduced me to the concepts of self-leadership and then self-coaching after that. So I've got a lot to thank Andrew for. But he talks widely in his book, Self-Leadership, that most people wait for an event in their lives to almost recognize that they have to lead themselves with intentionality. Whereas I know both of us would argue that actually it's quite a good discipline to get into now in terms of leading yourself and coaching yourself rather than waiting for the event, right? Because then we're actually more deterministic. So just talk us through as much as you want in recent months or last year or so about what you've been going through and how that self-coaching perspective for you has helped you.
Yeah, I think that's a very, it's a deep kind of, sometimes futzy and not evident, even though beautiful topic. I think, yeah, definitely, wait, sometimes it's just, we wait for, like you say, we wait for events because without or triggers, right? Without the events, we don't have the knockouts. And so we don't become aware of what's going on. So, right. So, for instance, when I come back to this, initial like marketing director that kind of, killed my confidence, I think that comes back to how do we listen to ourselves deep inside. I think parents, even though, you have good parents and they give you freedom and love, but even though you go to good schools and you have good teachers, we're not taught how to listen to ourselves, like how to listen to this, little inside voice. I think that's the biggest thing because we the human beings, I think we have answers. We have our own guides. Some people may be gifted, and sometimes we look at them very strangely because they behave differently. But I think they're all right. And so if I look at this, first experiences, whether professional, personal, or what I've been going through, like you said, like a few, year ago or this year. So the last few years I've been so much head down into work that I kind of, I was closing a project, a company. That's kind of emotionally and cognitively speaking, it's big, right? I mean, even though I did it, I'm resilient, I knew it was part of the business. I did it, but it's still kind of, wounding, right? You get some wounds. And then starting new projects where potentially you're not in fit, with the leadership or with other people. All these entrepreneurial and complex projects, you don't really acknowledge it or face it or see it, recognize it, but it kind of fades you out, right? Or kind of puts you apart. So I lost that sense of self-connection, I think, during 2-3 years. And that was also so this is when I was starting my PhD. Of course, with a lot of creativity and good flow. Actually, I did start all that with good flow. Everything started with good flow. That's a part of myself. I think that multiplying the project and getting into this kind of becoming a dad, which is a big event, getting into kind of marriage or in a couple, then sometimes the choice that you make or not, you're not in balance. You lack terrible awareness. You terribly lack awareness. And that awareness goes with that sense of self-connection, being balanced, knowing whether you feel good or not, knowing whether this is really what you want. So there's a question of priorities. So of course I was following projects. I was like, I did want to succeed all that, right? But in the same time, I was also like, starting other projects in my personal life. And so being that head down actually kind of really prevented me for nourishing or nurturing, giving the right level of energy to these other projects, right? Like the life, personal projects. And so eventually then finishing the thesis and then starting the project. And when then suddenly everything was starting to kind of, change and go better because I was kind of, turning pages and finishing things, then basically these other projects then were out of energy. And you go through, breakups, for instance, and things like that, right? And that is so in a way that was a surprise because I was like so head down. I was not even able to listen, observe. I mean, so that sense of like self-leadership, right? So what do we expect from leaders? They need to they need to spot the trends. They need to listen to the weak signals, before they become too big, right? All these skills, I think I was able to apply them very correctly in the business, in the research, and I wasn't able at all to use them, for me personally. And that a big lesson because this kind of, self-leadership is not just for business. It's actually for yourself as a human being to actually live a fulfilling and balanced life. And that's I think the biggest lesson. So I think I've been waiting too long actually I wasn't self-coaching enough. I wasn't applying the coaching that I knew, ask why, I wouldn't really answer now. Even like, trying to speak. Well, actually, I've tried to speak with coaches, 2 coaches, like, at some moments when I was starting a new company and it was kind of, in tension. They were not the right coaches. I didn't have the right experience. So I turned back. I went back to AI coaching. That was actually more aligned and more efficient, to be honest. That was also like kind of an interesting experience for me being in AI because I was just deciding to turn off a little bit the AI and go to humans. And actually, they were not really helping. So that was quite also interesting. But it's also interesting that if you wait too long, if you do not practice, and if you wait to be in pain to practice, it's hard to get the benefit. And sometimes then the only solution that remains for you is to get the snap on your head or is to get knocked out. And that's too late. And I think that's part of my experience is that, and it's a big lesson. Going back to what you just said, if I was going back, I would self-coach. I would get into practice before things, right? Just being aware of what I'm about to do. I'm about to get into a PhD. That's tough. right? Even though I'm inspired and I see that easy and I smile and it's laughing. All right, let's get into this, let's get into the self-coaching. Let's get a tool. Let's get something, a coach, right? I'm launching a new company. I'm not the leader. I'm a follower. There's a change of culture. I'm becoming a dad. That's a life change. Yeah, that's right. If I was going back, I would say, man, you do need to practice self-coaching or hire a coach. This is the advice that I would give myself 3 years ago.
I appreciate that. And what I'm finding very interesting as we're both operating in a similar space is that some people say to me, if I'm using AI coaching because I can't afford a coach and I'm trying to be reflective, it's almost about what is the first question that I need to ask the AI coach if I'm not even aware in the first place that I might benefit from self-coaching. It's a really interesting. So this thing comes about curiosity, doesn't it? And reflection and exploration. And I think a lot of working cultures out there now don't necessarily encourage, promote, reward that kind of behavior in work environments. So in the sort of 5 or 6 minutes we've got left, Olivier, it'd be really interesting to get your view, both from a personal perspective, but also what you're seeing professionally about the future of AI coaching and how it can really support individuals out there lead themselves more effectively.
I think if I had to summarize to one word, I would say reflexivity, stepping back. Just get people that step aside so they can reconsider, reframe the way they're doing things. It doesn't mean that is going to have them change fundamentally and then take the opposite direction. It's not about that, because when you make a decision, you make it. I think that the self-coaching or what AI helps us to do is to connect to ourselves. That's doing a PhD in the domain. What I've been seeing sometimes, people say, "Oh, AI doesn't have empathy, etc." But what I've been seeing is that we don't need AI to have empathy. But what AI can do is actually augments or triggers or develops your empathy and your sense of self. And with everything that I've been saying so far, I think that's two of the biggest life events and deep experiences that I've been going through. They have a pattern, even though there are two, or even maybe a few more. But it's that sense of I lost the connection with the self. I lost the listening to my voice, and I lost the command on myself, right? And so the self-coaching and self-coaching with AI, it is that I take a moment to kind of check in with myself, connect with myself, and figure out ways to either regenerate if I'm going into the tough moments, or actually generate the right thinking, the right structure, the right decisions, the right balance, so that I can find focus. This is really key.
One of the things that, again, the audience might appreciate through the work we've done in the past as well together is that if you do what you're talking about as an individual, by the very nature of that and looking at self, you tend to then start to look about how you're showing up in your really important relationships in life, as opposed to trying to find out what's wrong with the other person that's the relationship in your life and trying to either change them or trying to convince them that they need to change in a different way. And it brings it back to that point again, doesn't it, in terms of it's only us that can initiate change in any of our relationships, whether they're personal or professional.
Yeah. Do you mind just giving me repeating the one question that you want me to respond to?
It's about reflecting on that piece of the self-reflection enables us to show up differently in relationships, whereas what we normally think is we need to actually try and change the person in the relationship. Yeah.
I think sometimes just, it's like, when you want to eat a piece of cake and you eat maybe 2 or 3, the third one, is just, you're not going to sleep after that, right? That's basically where you need to be mindful. I think that's the same analogy, the same metaphor. I think this self-coaching, this practice is like, where is my balance and what do I need to reduce or what do you need to say no to, so that, I can get in a better balance and be more efficient and be better in the relationship with people, in the relationship with myself. That's the basics, right? So yeah, that's it.
Good. Well, let's finish, Olivier, by finding out a bit more about, obviously you've done so much already in your life, but you've got so much to offer. So what are you going to be spending the next few years focusing on?
Yeah, definitely. The next few years, we've been serving the world of coaching with AI, and also most importantly, serving managers, leaders, even learners, can be students, who actually need to learn these life and work critical skills that we've been speaking about. So I'm going to serve these in space and these populations, these audiences, with tools, with technologies, and so that they can they can be empowered, they can learn about themselves, and they can benefit from the wisdom from coaches like you, for instance, and the greatest frameworks. So that's what I'm going to do in the next few years.
Great. And if people have been interested in you today or want to collaborate in some way or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that, Liv?
They can just add me on LinkedIn. I think that's the easiest. Very active on LinkedIn.
Well, I love reading your content as well. I really appreciate you being very open with us today and showing that vulnerability and demonstrating that even if you come from one of the most loving backgrounds with all that support, it's never straightforward, so we all have our own stories and we all need to reflect on ourselves and the contribution that we're making to our own story.
Definitely.
So thanks again for being on the show, Olivier. It's been
My
lovely
pleasure,
to
Andrew.
hear from you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.